Have you ever wondered what happens when the world's most empathetic personality type completely loses it? You know, that friend who's always calm, always understanding, always putting everyone else first? Well, what if I told you that beneath that peaceful surface lies something so intense, so overwhelming, that when it finally breaks free, it can shock everyone around them? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most misunderstood aspects of the INFJ personality, what I call their psycho mode. But before you click away thinking this is about actual psychotic behavior, let me be clear. We're talking about those rare moments when an INFJ's emotional intensity reaches a breaking point that can seem almost supernatural to those who witness it. 1. Understanding the INFJ foundation, the calm before the storm. Let's start with the basics, shall we? INFJs make up only about 1 to 3% of the population, making them one of the rarest personality types. They're known as the advocates or the counselors, and for good reason. These folks are natural healers, deeply empathetic, and have an almost mystical ability to understand others' emotions and motivations. But here's what most people don't realize. This constant emotional processing comes at a massive cost. Imagine being a human emotional sponge, absorbing every feeling, every tension, every unspoken pain from everyone around you. That's an INFJ's daily reality. Most of the time, INFJs handle this incredible emotional load with grace. They're the ones friends call at 2 a.m. during crisis. They're the ones who notice when you're upset before you even realize it yourself. They give and give and give, often without asking for anything in return. But what happens to all that absorbed emotion? Where does it go when an INFJ has been everyone's therapist, mediator, and emotional support system for months or years without a break? 2. The emotional reservoir, when the dam starts cracking. Think of an INFJ's psyche as a massive emotional reservoir. Every day, they're collecting feelings, not just their own, but everyone else's too. Their dominant function, introverted intuition, is constantly processing patterns, reading between the lines, and picking up on subtleties that others miss entirely. This isn't just empathy we're talking about. It's emotional hypervigilance. An INFJ can walk into a room and instantly sense that someone had an argument that morning or that there's unresolved tension between two colleagues. They feel it all, process it all, and often take responsibility for fixing it all. For months, maybe even years, this reservoir fills up slowly. The INFJ manages it through their usual coping mechanisms: journaling, alone time, deep conversations with trusted friends, creative outlets. But life doesn't always give us the luxury of perfect emotional maintenance, does it? Work stress piles up. Relationships get complicated. Family drama emerges. Global events feel overwhelming. And suddenly, that reservoir isn't just full, it's overflowing. The dam starts showing cracks, and the INFJ begins displaying warning signs that most people completely miss. 3. The warning signs, red flags, everyone ignores. Before an INFJ reaches their breaking point, they almost always give subtle signals. The problem? These signs are so unlike their usual behavior that people either don't notice or completely misinterpret them. First, they start withdrawing. The person who used a text back immediately suddenly takes hours or days to respond. They cancel plans they would normally never miss. They become short in conversations, giving one-word answers instead of their usual thoughtful responses. People often think the INFJ is just busy or going through a phase. "Oh, Sarah's just stressed about work," they'll say. But what's really happening is that the INFJ is desperately trying to create space to process the emotional overload. Next comes the emotional numbness. Friends might notice that their usually passionate, caring INFJ friend seems flat, disconnected. They're not as excited about things they love, not as concerned about problems they'd normally want to solve immediately. This isn't depression. It's emotional shutdown as a protective mechanism. Then there's the irritability over small things. The INFJ who never complains suddenly snaps at slow internet or gets frustrated with minor inconveniences. These aren't character flaws emerging. They're pressure valves releasing tiny amounts of steam before the explosion. 4. The trigger event, the final straw. Every INFJ psycho mode episode has a trigger event, that final straw that breaks the camel's back. Here's the thing though, the trigger is almost never proportional to the reaction that follows. It might be something incredibly small and seemingly insignificant. Maybe someone interrupts them while they're speaking. Maybe a friend cancels plans at the last minute. Maybe they overhear someone making an insensitive comment. Maybe they're asked to take on just one more responsibility when they're already drowning. To an outside observer, the trigger seems minor, even silly. Why is she freaking out over such a small thing, they might wonder. But that's because they can't see the enormous emotional reservoir that's been building pressure for months or years. They can't see that this tiny trigger isn't the cause. It's just the final drop that caused the overflow. The trigger event is often something that violates the INFJ's core values or sense of fairness. INFJs have incredibly strong moral compasses, and when they perceive injustice, especially after they've been emotionally depleted, their reaction can be swift and intense. 5. The explosion, when the INFJ unleashes everything. When an INFJ finally reaches their breaking point, the result can be absolutely shocking to everyone who knows them. This quiet, patient, understanding person suddenly becomes a force of nature that seems completely out of character. But here's what's really happening. All those months or years of suppressed emotions, absorbed pain, and unaddressed stress come pouring out at once. It's not pretty, and it's not controlled. The INFJ might yell, cry, say things they don't mean, or make decisions that seem completely irrational. They might finally tell people exactly what they think. And for someone who usually sugarcoats everything to protect others' feelings, this can be brutal. Years of suppressed frustrations, unspoken resentments, and hidden disappointments all surface simultaneously. The INFJ in psycho mode might cut people off completely, make dramatic life changes, or express anger in ways that leave everyone around them stunned. Remember, these are people who pride themselves on being understanding and patient. Seeing them lose control can be genuinely frightening for those who've never witnessed it before. 6. The guilt and shame cycle, when reality hits. Once the initial explosion subsides, the INFJ is usually hit with an overwhelming wave of guilt and shame. Their auxiliary function, extrovert feeling, makes them hyper-aware of how their actions affect others. They start replaying every word, every action, analyzing the damage they've caused. This guilt is often worse than the original emotional overload that caused the breakdown. INFJs define themselves by their ability to be supportive, understanding, and helpful. When they feel they've failed at this, even during a completely understandable emotional breakdown, the self-criticism can be devastating. They might spend days or weeks beating themselves up, convinced they're terrible people for losing control. They'll apologize profusely, even for reactions that were completely justified. They'll promise themselves and others that it will never happen again, often without addressing the underlying issues that caused the breakdown in the first place. This guilt cycle can actually make future explosions more likely, as the INFJ becomes even more determined to suppress their needs and emotions to avoid disappointing others again. 7. The aftermath, relationships in crisis. The aftermath of an INFJ's emotional explosion often reveals the true nature of their relationships. Some people, shocked by seeing this different side of their INFJ friend, might pull away or express disappointment. These reactions can be particularly painful for the INFJ, confirming their worst fears about being too much or too difficult. However, the aftermath can also be incredibly revealing and potentially healing. Sometimes, the INFJ's breakdown forces long overdue conversations about boundaries, expectations, and mutual support. People might finally realize how much emotional labor the INFJ has been carrying and start taking responsibility for their own emotional needs. The relationships that survive and grow stronger after an INFJ's breakdown are usually the ones worth keeping. These are the people who can see past the explosion to understand the pain and exhaustion that caused it. They're willing to make changes to create a more balanced, sustainable dynamic. Unfortunately, some relationships don't survive. People who are used to the INFJ being their constant source of support might not be able to handle seeing them as a complex human being with their own needs and limits. 8. The recovery phase, rebuilding from the ground up. Recovery for an INFJ after a major emotional breakdown isn't just about feeling better. It's about fundamentally restructuring how they approach relationships and emotional management. This process can take months or even years, and it's rarely linear. The first step is usually acceptance. The INFJ has to accept that their breakdown happened, that it was a normal human response to impossible circumstances, and that they're not a terrible person for having limits. This might sound simple, but for someone who's built their identity around being endlessly giving and understanding, it's revolutionary. Next comes the difficult work of rebuilding boundaries. INFJs often have to learn to say no for the first time in their adult lives. They have to practice recognizing their own emotional needs and actually communicating them to others. This feels foreign and selfish at first, even though it's basic emotional health. The recovery phase also involves developing new coping strategies. The old methods, journaling, alone time, creative outlets, are still important, but they might not be enough anymore. The INFJ might need to learn more active stress management techniques, seek professional help, or make significant lifestyle changes. 9. The silver lining, growth through breakdown. While an INFJ's emotional breakdown can be traumatic for everyone involved, it often marks the beginning of a crucial growth period. Many INFJs report that their first major breakdown, while painful, was ultimately one of the most important experiences of their lives. The breakdown forces them to confront patterns they've been unconsciously perpetuating for years. They start to see how their excessive people-pleasing and boundary issues have been hurting not just themselves, but potentially the people they care about too. Through the recovery process, many INFJs develop a more balanced approach to relationships. They learn that setting boundaries and taking care of their own needs doesn't make them selfish. It makes them more capable of genuinely helping others in the long run. They often become more authentic in their relationships, dropping the constant performance of being fine and helpful all the time. This authenticity, while scary at first, often leads to deeper, more meaningful connections with others. 10. Prevention strategies, building emotional resilience. The best way to prevent future INFJ breakdowns is to develop sustainable emotional management strategies before reaching the breaking point. This requires a complete shift in mindset from reactive crisis management to proactive emotional health maintenance. Regular emotional check-ins become crucial. INFJs need to develop the habit of honestly assessing their emotional state and stress levels, rather than just pushing through until they can't anymore. This might involve daily journaling, weekly therapy sessions, or regular conversations with trusted friends or family members. Boundary setting becomes a daily practice rather than a crisis response. This means learning to say no to requests that would overextend them, even when saying yes feels like the nice thing to do. It means limiting exposure to emotionally draining people or situations when possible. Physical self-care also plays a crucial role. INFJs often neglect their physical needs when they're focused on emotional caregiving, but regular exercise, proper nutrition, and adequate sleep are foundational to emotional resilience. 11. The misunderstanding problem, why people don't get it. One of the biggest challenges INFJs face is that their emotional breakdowns are often completely misunderstood by the people around them. Because INFJs are typically so controlled and giving, people assume they're naturally resilient and don't have the same emotional needs as everyone else. When an INFJ finally breaks down, people might react with shock, disappointment, or even anger. "I thought you were stronger than this," they might say, or "this isn't like you at all." These reactions, while natural, can be incredibly damaging to an already vulnerable INFJ. The truth is, INFJ breakdowns aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of strength finally reaching its limits. The fact that an INFJ can carry so much emotional weight for so long before breaking is actually remarkable, not shameful. Understanding this requires a shift in how we think about emotional labor and mental health. Just because someone is good at something doesn't mean they should have to do it constantly without support or recognition. 12. The healing journey, long-term recovery. True healing for an INFJ after a major breakdown involves more than just getting back to their old patterns. It requires developing a completely new relationship with their emotions, their boundaries, and their sense of responsibility for others' well-being. Many INFJs benefit from therapy during this process, particularly approaches that help them understand their patterns and develop healthier coping strategies. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help with the guilt and self-criticism, while mindfulness-based approaches can help with emotional regulation. The healing journey also often involves examining childhood patterns and family dynamics. Many INFJs learned early in life that their worth was tied to their ability to make others feel better, and unlearning this pattern is crucial for long-term emotional health. Some INFJs find that their breakdown leads them to make significant life changes, changing careers, ending unhealthy relationships, or relocating to environments that better support their emotional needs. While these changes can be scary, they're often necessary for preventing future breakdowns. 13. Supporting an INFJ in crisis, what others can do. If you have an INFJ in your life who's going through a breakdown, your response can make an enormous difference in their recovery. The most important thing is to resist the urge to minimize their experience or push them to get back to normal quickly. Instead, try to understand that their breakdown represents years of accumulated stress and emotional overload. Acknowledge that they've been carrying a heavy burden and that their reaction is understandable given the circumstances. Practical support is often more helpful than emotional support during the immediate aftermath. Offer to handle specific tasks, respect their need for space, and don't take their temporary emotional unavailability personally. Long-term support involves helping them maintain the changes they're trying to make. Don't pressure them to go back to their old patterns of endless giving and people-pleasing, even if it was convenient for you. Support their boundary-setting efforts, even when it means you might not get the same level of emotional support you're used to. Conclusion: when an INFJ goes into what we might call psycho mode, it's not actually psychotic behavior. It's the natural result of emotional overwhelm in someone who's been giving too much for too long. These breakdowns, while painful and disruptive, often serve as crucial wake-up calls that lead to healthier patterns and more authentic relationships. Understanding this phenomenon requires us to recognize that emotional labor has real costs, and that even the most caring and resilient people have limits. INFJs aren't superhuman emotional processors. They're complex individuals who need support, boundaries, and understanding just like everyone else. The next time you see an INFJ in your life starting to withdraw or seem overwhelmed, don't wait for the breakdown. Check in with them, offer specific support, and remind them that it's okay to prioritize their own emotional needs. Sometimes, preventing the storm is much easier than cleaning up after it. Remember, behind every INFJ psycho mode episode is a person who's been trying desperately to hold everything together, often at great personal cost. They deserve compassion, understanding, and space to heal, not judgment for finally reaching their human limits. The goal isn't to prevent INFJs from ever feeling overwhelmed. That's impossible given their natural sensitivity and empathy. The goal is to create environments and relationships where they can express their needs before reaching the breaking point, where emotional labor is shared more equitably, and where their incredible gifts are appreciated without being exploited. When we understand and support the INFJs in our lives properly, we don't just prevent breakdowns. We create space for them to thrive in ways that benefit everyone around them. After all, a healthy, balanced INFJ is an incredible force for good in the world. They just need to be allowed to be human while they're doing it.